Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to 19th century London just in time to gag politely behind a handkerchief and wade through one of the worst smelling summers in human history. This is the tale of sewage, sweat, science, and a river so foul it could knock out a grown man from 50 feet away. The skies are sunny, the top hats are tall, and the Thames is bubbling. You're standing on a stone bridge, trying not to breathe too deeply. It's July of 1858, and you, like everyone else in London, are dealing with something called the Great Stink. Not a metaphor, not a quirky nickname. A literal stink, a reek. A nasal assault so powerful it caused Parliament to soak their curtains in bleach. And you're just trying to get to the bakery without vomiting into your bonnet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and local time down in the comments. It's fun seeing who else wanders these sleepy paths with us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by walking down a cobblestone street just off the Strand. The heat clings to you like wet wool. A cart rattles past carrying barrels that you sincerely hope contain ale. But your nose says otherwise. Children run barefoot. Dogs bark. And somewhere nearby, a man is shouting about eels. And then the wind shifts. You freeze. Your eyes water. Because now, wafting up from the river and through every window in sight, is the smell. It's not just bad. It's layered. A symphony of decay. Rotting vegetables. Human waste. Dead fish. Possibly dead everything. And heat. Which somehow makes it worse. As if the sun itself decided to participate in your suffering. The Thames, which winds through the city like a proud artery, is no longer the silver thread of Shakespeare's day. It is now a giant, slow-moving, warm toilet. Every house, every business, every pub and palace flushes directly into it. And thanks to new indoor plumbing, we'll get to that. The flush rate has never been higher. But here's the twist: Londoners didn't start this summer with the intention of breaking olfactory records. This has been brewing for decades, literally. The city exploded in size during the Industrial Revolution. More people, more houses, more waste. But the infrastructure. Still thinking it's the 1700s. Cesspits overflow, privies leak, rain washes everything into the sewers, which are just open ditches half the time. And all of it ends up in the Thames. The government had been warned. Doctors had been warning. Even the newspapers, who usually saved their panic for royal gossip, had been warning. But nothing spurs a proper Victorian crisis like rich people not being able to eat lunch because the soup smells like death. And this summer it is hot. Unnaturally so. The kind of heat that settles into your clothing, into your hair, into the mortar between buildings. And when that heat hits the river already filled with the concentrated waste of 2 million people, it doesn't just sit there. It rises. A vapor, a stench, a presence. You can feel it before you smell it. A heaviness in the lungs. Like the air is trying to leave your body in protest. Even the Queen considers leaving the city. Parliament debates sewage reform with handkerchiefs over their noses. A bottle of disinfectant on every desk. Curtains are soaked in chloride of lime. Windows are closed, then reopened, then closed again in a panic. But the river doesn't care. It keeps oozing. And the people, they just endure. Some flee to the countryside. Others stuff handkerchiefs with herbs. Perfume sellers make a fortune. One doctor suggests soaking clothes in carbolic acid, which does help if you don't mind smelling like a pickled goat. You, however, have errands to run, so you make your way through the stinking city like everyone else, holding your breath, gritting your teeth, and hoping that someone, anyone, will figure out how to fix the river before it kills someone. Again, historians still argue whether the summer of 1858 was truly the worst in London's sanitation history, or just the one that finally got everyone's attention. But there's no debate about its legacy, because out of this stench, something remarkable will rise. Not immediately, not quietly, but it's coming. For now. Though hold your nose. We're just getting started. The river is moving but barely. It's thick. Not like syrup exactly. More like soup made by someone who hates you. You walk along the embankment, trying not to look directly at the water, because every glance brings another unpleasant discovery. A bloated rat, a suspiciously pale boot, a perfect circle of cabbage that somehow floats with alarming grace. This is the Thames in 1858, and it is, without exaggeration, a floating archive of human regret. The problem isn't new. London's been tossing things into the river for centuries-old shoes. Bad luck. Entire theories of public health. But now, with the population ballooning, the Thames has become more sewer than stream. Every flush, every bucket dumped from a window, every overflowing cesspit has one destination: the river. And it's not coping. You lean over the balustrade just enough to see the surface bubble. You immediately regret it. The water doesn't just smell, it speaks. In bubbles, in oily swirls, in smells so complex they could be studied like ancient languages. There's something that might have once been bread. There's something that definitely never was. And then floating past with the elegance of a terrible parade float is a dead pig. You take a step back. Historians estimate that by mid-1858, thousands of tons of waste were being dumped into the Thames daily. Human waste, industrial runoff, animal carcasses, brewery leftovers, chemical dyes if you could pour it. London poured it, and because the city's infrastructure hadn't caught up to its growth, the river bore the brunt of it. The Thames was tidal, which meant it didn't always flow in the way one hopes a river might. Sometimes it just sloshed back and forth, gently stirring its contents like a sewer smoothie. And people lived with it, worked beside it, even drank from it. Yes. Despite everything, there were still households and entire communities that drew drinking water from the river. Pumps on the embankment were used daily. Pipes pulled in water upstream, where it was cleaner. Though, of course, cleaner is a generous word when your measuring stick is not actively on fire. Doctors warned against it. Some newspapers screamed. But many Victorians still clung to the belief that disease came from bad smells, not germs. This was the age of miasma theory, where foul air, not bacteria, was believed to spread illness. So the focus was always on masking the smell, not cleaning the source. That smell, by the way, was more than unpleasant. It was a barrier. It closed theaters. It emptied churches. People walked in the middle of streets to avoid the worst of it. At low tide, the stench intensified so badly that residents along the Thames boarded up their windows and stuffed towels in the cracks. You pass a family doing just that. The father's pounding nails into window frames. The mother's sprinkling something that might be lavender or maybe just hopeful sawdust into the air. A small boy holds a dead goldfish, mournful, standing beside a bowl filled with what you sincerely hope is lemonade. One historian later described the river as having the consistency of weak gruel. Another called it a sluggish snake of excrement. The polite ones simply referred to it as the nuisance. But for all the disgust, most Londoners were powerless to change it. The river was part of the city's identity. Trade moved on it. Barges floated through it. Ferrymen rowed across it. Some brave or foolish souls even swam in it. There's a rumor of a man who challenged his friends to a river swim for a bottle of gin. He got halfway across, vomited twice, and returned with one eye permanently crossed. Historians still debate the accuracy of this tale, but the point stands. The river was both life source and life threat. It fed, carried, and poisoned the city all at once. And no one had a plan. You walk further downstream, where the smell shifts from fermented fruit to something closer to battery acid and despair. Factories line the banks here, tanneries, dye houses, soapworks, all of them pouring their waste directly into the water. No filters, no restrictions, just gravity and convenience. A local shopkeeper waves to you from his doorway. He's selling fish. You decide not to ask where they were caught, because what else could people do? The city kept growing. The river kept choking. And until something broke, this was just life. But the summer of 1858 was the tipping point. The heat, more than anything, forced the issue. Heat made everything worse. The water level dropped, the waste compacted, the miasma thickened. It was no longer just unpleasant, it was unlivable. Even Parliament, safely tucked away in their riverside fortress, could no longer ignore it. And that's when something changed. Not overnight. Not neatly. But you can feel the tension in the air now. A kind of collective desperation. Something's going to give, someone's going to snap. And the river just keeps oozing along like it knows. Like it's waiting. You're watching a woman flush her toilet and you're not proud of how long you stare. Not at her, of course, but at the toilet. Because in 1858 London, this is a novelty. A gleaming porcelain contraption that promises modern comfort with just a tug of the brass chain. It gurgles once, rather proudly, and then sends its contents whooshing away into the problem. This is the story of how a great invention helped create an even greater stink. Indoor plumbing was on the rise. The Victorians, for all their lace and formality, were secretly obsessed with hygiene. Or at least the appearance of hygiene. And when flush toilets became fashionable among the upper and middle classes, Londoners embraced them with almost embarrassing enthusiasm. The trouble was, the city wasn't ready. The average London sewer was designed for rainwater runoff. Not human waste, not sudsy bathwater, not 10,000 gallons of increasingly confident Victorian flushes. Before the flush toilet took off, most homes used chamber pots. You did your business, and then someone, usually a servant or a member of your household with bad luck, carried it out to dump in the cesspit or gutter. Sometimes it was sold to farmers. Sometimes it was just flung into the street with a warning shout of, "Gardez-loo." That's French. Sort of, don't worry about it. But by the mid-1800s, the flush toilet was everywhere from Buckingham Palace to your cousin Edmund's second-floor flat. And the more people flushed, the more everything ended up in the sewers. Which brings us to a moment of unfortunate plumbing history. Sir Joseph William Bazalgette, more on him later, once calculated that each person in London produced about 2.5 pints of urine and a pound of solid waste per day. Multiply that by 2 million, and you have a daily river of unmentionables that simply had nowhere else to go. It flowed through drains, into ancient brick tunnels, out into the open, and then into the Thames. The term flush and forget became more than just a pipe dream. It was a civic disaster. Engineers panicked. Cesspits overflowed faster than they could be emptied. Streets flooded with brownish puddles after every heavy rain. Rats enjoyed a population boom, so dramatic that some considered them part of the city's unpaid workforce. Even rats needed air fresheners. One curious fact, some of the earliest flush toilets didn't have proper U-bends, the curved pipe that traps odors in modern plumbing. So when you flushed, the waste disappeared? Yes, but the smell came right back up the next time you lifted the lid. As if the system was saying, "Thanks for that." Here's a little reminder. Some households burned incense in the bathroom. Others poured vinegar down the bowl. A few installed entire shelves of lavender sachets, which mostly just ended up smelling like floral regret. But the flushing continued because it felt modern, clean, civilized, even if outside. The streets were less London proper and more London poo soup. And once the water companies got involved, things went from bad to British. Multiple private companies controlled London's water supply and sewer management, which meant that clean water came in one pipe, and waste went out another, eventually ending up in the same river. This wasn't negligence, it was profit logic. If you're selling water, and no one regulates you, you're not going to spend money on waste management. You're going to sell more water. And if people flush more as a result, not your problem. Except it was your problem. Because disease began to spread. Cholera, mostly. A name that sends a chill down your spine now, but back then, it was a mysterious, cruel guest that arrived uninvited, turned your insides to water, and left graves in its wake. London had faced outbreaks before 1832, 1849, and again in 1854. Thousands died. And while some brave doctors suspected the water, most officials clung to miasma theory like a favorite musty blanket. They believed smell caused disease, which, to be fair, made the Thames seem extremely dangerous. But for all the wrong reasons. You step over a drain grating and glance down. There's something sloshing beneath it that defies polite vocabulary. Somewhere, a woman is drawing water for tea. Somewhere else, a child plays beside the riverbank, cheerfully poking a stick into a pile of damp horror. And all across London, people are flushing, over and over, because progress, like sewage, doesn't always take the most direct route. Historians still argue about the exact timeline, how many toilets, how much waste, how quickly the system collapsed. But no one denies that the rise of indoor plumbing, paired with the absence of a coherent waste strategy, accelerated the crisis. London had modernized its bathrooms without modernizing its back end. And when you flush with no plan, the past always comes back up. You're standing in the shadow of Parliament, and for once, the drama isn't coming from a speech, it's coming from the river, specifically the part of the Thames that laps gently and foully against the Palace of Westminster. The breeze is uncooperative, the air is thick, and inside the hallowed chambers of Britain's ruling class, members of Parliament are wilting. The great stink has reached the highest levels of government, literally. In July of 1858, the stench from the Thames was so overpowering that it invaded Parliament, not just in metaphor or policy, in actual nostril-assaulting reality. The House of Commons sits right on the riverbank, and during this particularly sunny, particularly awful week, the river rises up like a smelly ghost to haunt the lawmaking process. You're seated in the public gallery, watching a group of politicians dab their faces with embroidered handkerchiefs and visibly gag as they try to continue business as usual. One man covers his face with a silk scarf. Another mops his forehead with a rag soaked in something lemon-scented and deeply ineffective. A third just gives up and starts muttering something about building the next parliament in Scotland. But the real showstopper, the lime-soaked curtains? Yes, in a move that is somehow both desperate and extremely on-brand for the Victorians. Parliament responds to the unbearable odor by soaking their window draperies in chloride of lime, a crude but powerful disinfectant and deodorizer. It's not subtle. The building reeks like a public pool, a hospital, and a jar of pickled onions all at once. And still, the smell from the river wins. Outside, Londoners fan themselves with newspapers and try not to breathe too deeply. Inside, elected officials are deciding whether to pass legislation or just throw up into their boots. Eventually, they choose legislation. Sort of. A bill is introduced to address the state of the Thames. Not because of long-term health concerns, not because cholera has killed thousands, but because the smell is interrupting Parliament. Democracy, as it turns out, can endure many things but not raw sewage in the nostrils. Historians still argue whether this moment represents the triumph of public pressure or just the most British possible form of political motivation, being too polite to say I'm dying, but too uncomfortable to ignore the aroma of doom. The debates are full of veiled complaints. The effluvia, one MP begins delicately, has rendered deliberation most trying. Another stands up and, with what can only be called legislative disgust, declares, if the noble lords wish to complete their work, the noble lords must cease to breathe. It gets to the point where engineers are called in not to fix the river, but to find a way to seal Parliament from it. There are genuine proposals to hang sheets soaked in carbolic acid from every window. One man suggests moving government sessions to an inland location. Another proposes floating the entire building upriver. You can't make this up. And while Parliament dithers, the people adapt. You walk through Whitehall and see cloth masks tied over faces. Ladies carry pomanders, delicate containers filled with spices and herbs held discreetly near their noses. Apothecaries sell smell salts that are really just strong vinegar in disguise. A baker smears mint oil on his mustache. A carriage driver rubs turpentine on his coat collar. Someone else burns dried oranges and lavender in a pan and just hopes for the best. But here's the irony for all the panic, all the parliamentary perfume slinging. The actual cause of disease is still misunderstood. They think it's the stink itself, the smell, the miasma, which is why so much of the focus is on masking, covering, or neutralizing the odor instead of removing the waste that causes it. They don't yet understand germs. They don't yet believe that cholera is in the water, not the air. And so, while Parliament debates curtains and carbolic sprays, London continues to pump waste into the Thames, flushing, pouring, dumping, and praying for a strong breeze to blow it all somewhere else. You sit on a stone bench beside a group of officials from the Home Office. One of them has just placed a camphor-soaked sponge into his waistcoat and is now sniffling dramatically. Another has invented a portable smelling bell, which is just a bell-shaped mask filled with lavender. He wears it like a beak. And the river. The river doesn't care. It keeps sliding past, dark and thick, like a giant serpent made of sewage and poor decisions. It's winning this battle, but not for long, because desperation, especially the very posh kind, is finally forcing Parliament to act. And just beyond the curtain, a quiet civil engineer is making notes. He has a plan, and it involves pipes. You're standing beside a man who is waving a stick at the river and muttering about invisible poison. He's wearing a hat that suggests academic importance, though the bird droppings on the brim suggest otherwise. He's explaining, quite seriously, that the smell rising from the Thames is trying to kill you. And for once in this story, you can't even blame him. Because in 1858, miasma theory rules the day. The belief that bad smells cause disease is not some fringe idea. It's the mainstream. It's medical consensus. It's printed in textbooks, whispered by doctors, and scrawled on posters warning citizens to avoid foul airs. Which brings us to a particularly dangerous intersection. Science, superstition, and a whole lot of sewage. You stroll through Smithfield Market and see the signs protect your lungs. Avoid the vapors. One man sells health vinegar to dab behind the ears. Another offers a pouch of ground nutmeg as an anti-stink charm. No one's joking. They believe this because the smells are real. The bodies are real, but the connection completely wrong. They think cholera floats on the wind like a ghost with a grudge. They think it creeps into your nose and sets up shop in your lungs. If you can't smell it, you're safe. If you can, well, time to hold your breath. You pass a fashionable woman walking with a bouquet of posies tied to her wrist. Not for beauty, for protection. She holds it up every time a carriage rattles by. Every time the wind shifts. Every time the Thames makes itself known. She's not alone. Victorians carry sponges soaked in vinegar. They line their hats with mint. They stuff herbs into handkerchiefs and pretend it's working. Even Queen Victoria reportedly kept her windows shut tight and favored perfume strong enough to qualify as small arms. Meanwhile, cholera kills by the thousands. In 1854, just 4 years earlier, a quiet doctor named John Snow made a discovery. He traced a cholera outbreak to a water pump on Broad Street. He removed the handle, the cases dropped, and he made the radical suggestion cholera was in the water, not the air. He was mostly ignored. The miasma theory was too strong, too established, too convenient. You can smell miasma. You can fight it with flowers. It gives you something to blame without requiring pipes, drains, or reform. Germs. On the other hand, invisible, complicated, and most importantly, not smelly. Historians still argue whether John Snow's findings were truly overlooked or simply misunderstood. Some claim his work laid the groundwork for later change. Others say the establishment buried it in a rose-scented fog of denial. Either way, in 1858 the theory still stands: if it smells, it's dangerous. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Which explains the panic. Which explains the soaked curtains in Parliament. Which explains the man now beside you selling small bottles of Thames defense elixir made of eucalyptus, vinegar, and crushed hope. You ask him if it works. He says, "I haven't died yet." Fair point. You stroll through Soho next, passing a row of buildings where entire families live above butcher shops and fish stalls. Flies buzz in the heat. A boy dumps a bucket of something suspicious into a grate. A dog drinks from a puddle you don't want to think about too hard. This is how most people live, and when illness comes, they blame the stink. Not the water, not the waste, just the air, which is why every solution is temporary. Perfume, lime wash, street cleaning with vinegar and sand. They scrub the symptoms while the cause just keeps bubbling. You stop near the river again, watching a group of dock workers unload crates beside a barge that smells like a fermented glove. One of them has a handkerchief tied across his mouth. Another smokes a pipe in the hope that the tobacco masks the horror. A third just shrugs and says, "Better than the tannery." That's the thing about miasma: it gave people something to fight, but also something to accept. It was everywhere, but not personal. You could blame it without feeling guilty, even as cholera ravaged entire neighborhoods, even as water pumps quietly spread death. The government finally began to listen, but only after the smell reached their noses. Not the deaths, not the suffering, the stink. And in a way, that's the tragedy of miasma theory. It wasn't just wrong, it was comfortable. But comfort won't save a city. And in the coming weeks, someone will finally decide it's time to stop masking the stink and start draining it. It's just after dawn, and you're watching a man in a battered hat carry a wooden bucket of human waste across a cobbled alley like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. Which, in 1858 London, it is. This is a night soil man, and you're about to follow him through one of the most unpleasant, underappreciated, and wildly underpaid jobs in the entire history of cities. He moves quickly, with the brisk confidence of someone who doesn't want to stop and talk to anyone about his work or stand downwind of himself. The smell is intense, layered, oddly sweet at moments, and fundamentally indescribable. It clings to him like a second coat. You trail him past rows of brick houses where most people are still asleep, but the buckets outside their doors lined up like forgotten milk deliveries tell you everything. This is the early shift. Before the sun gets too high, before the streets are crowded, before someone accidentally steps into something you don't want to think too hard about. Back then, not every home had a flush toilet, especially not in the slums, where thousands lived crammed together in buildings that had once been townhouses, now split into single-room tenements. Instead, families used privies outdoor toilets, often shared between multiple households, perched over deep pits in the ground. And when those pits filled up, someone had to empty them. Enter the night soil men. These were the unsung sanitation workers of the pre-sewer age. They worked after dark, carrying human waste by the bucket load, hoisting it into carts and hauling it away. Sometimes it went to the countryside to be used as fertilizer. Sometimes it went to waste yards. Sometimes it just disappeared into ditches. And sometimes, if they were behind schedule or bribed by the wrong person, it ended up in the Thames. You follow your guide into a small brick courtyard where another man is elbow deep in a pit. He looks up, nods once, then goes back to his task like he's gutting a pumpkin filled with doom. The smell is unbearable, even outdoors. But these men are used to it. They chew herbs to mask the taste in their mouths. They stuff cotton in their noses. Some dab vinegar under their eyes to keep from watering. They're paid in pennies, often jeered at in daylight, often forced to work in dangerous conditions. The pits collapse. The carts overturn. There are stories too many of night soil men who fell into cesspools and never came out. And no one writes songs about them. Historians still argue how large the profession truly was. Some say hundreds of night soil men worked the city. Others claim it was a smaller, more secretive group, less a workforce and more a network of necessity. What everyone agrees on: they kept the city barely functioning. You duck into an alley where a man with a clipboard is arguing with a resident about whose turn it is to pay for the next pit emptying. There's shouting. There's pointing. There's the very real threat of a thrown chamber pot. Because sanitation wasn't just disgusting, it was political. Privies were often built too close to wells. Some were illegal. Others were installed in cellars, which seems like a great idea until you realize what happens when it rains. Some landlords paid for upkeep, others didn't. So the burden fell on the poorest residents, those with the least choice and the most exposure to the dangers. You pause near a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread does battle with the reek from a nearby pit. The bread loses. One boy walks past with a cloth tied around his face. He's holding his nose and carrying a note from his mother asking the neighbor to stop dumping wash water near their steps. The note is sealed with string and what appears to be a dried rose petal. A futile act of civility in a city knee-deep in filth. You follow the cart now, rattling along cobblestone, its contents sloshing ominously. The night soil men joke quietly among themselves gallows humor. Mostly. One mutters about starting a perfume line. Another says he's thinking of changing careers. Maybe something easier, like lion taming. You believe him. The cart pulls up beside a small gate, behind which lies a field of half-dead grass. They dump the waste into a larger pit, cover it with straw, and mark the time on a wooden slate. No one else is here. No one wants to be. But you're left with a strange mix of awe and horror, because these men unnoticed, reviled, and paid next to nothing were the only reason London didn't collapse under the weight of its own waste. Until, of course, they couldn't keep up. The population kept growing. The privies filled faster. The carts ran behind. And more night soil ended up in open drains, in alleyways, in basements, and yes, in the river. The Great Stink wasn't just about plumbing failure. It was a system failure. A failure to modernize, to prioritize, to respect the dirty, backbreaking work that held the city together. You leave the field as the sun begins to climb. The night soil men disappear, their work done. The city wakes, and the smell remains. You're in one of the poorer boroughs now, where the streets are narrower, the air heavier, and the smells more committed. Everything here is closer: the houses, the people, the privies. You step around a laundry line sagging with damp shirts and duck under a crooked wooden beam that probably wasn't intended to hold up an entire building, but is trying its best anyway. This is the East End of London in 1858, and you're about to learn that not all stink was created equal. Because how you experienced the great stink, how much you suffered, how close the cholera came, depended entirely on how much money you had. The Thames didn't discriminate, but London's housing sure did. In the wealthier areas, Mayfair, Kensington. Parts of Westminster residents had options. They could afford to leave the city for a few months. They had better-built homes with water closets, some with their own misguided cesspools. They had perfume, private doctors, staff to sweep the filth from their doorsteps before breakfast. And most importantly, they lived uphill. You, however, are downhill now. The slums are built in the natural basins of the city, where the water runs to. Not from rain doesn't drain away, it sits. Waste doesn't disappear, it lingers. Every heavy storm turns the alleys into brownish canals, and every heat wave wakes up the smells like an angry bear. You pass a family sharing a single room, their doorway propped open with a broomstick. Inside, 6 people are sleeping in shifts. A baby cries. Someone's boiling potatoes in a pot that probably also washed feet yesterday. The privy out back serves 9 households. It hasn't been emptied in weeks. And yet, people endure. A girl in bare feet sweeps the stoop with quiet focus. A boy with no shoes and too much energy is selling hot eels from a cart. A woman across the alley sings softly while mending a shirt. Life goes on because it has to, but the risk is higher here. Cholera hits hardest in places like this. So does typhoid, dysentery, smallpox. The water is worse, the drains are shallower, and the remedies often nothing more than boiled onion juice and hope. Across town, someone's complaining about the smell ruining their garden party. Here, the smell means the privy is full again, and that means someone's going to get sick. The disparity is obvious everywhere you look. On one street, servants are laying rose petals in bowls to purify the air. On another, a man is burning rags in a bucket to try and cover up the scent of something dying in the floorboards. One household has curtains soaked in camphor. Another can't afford glass in their windows. Even within neighborhoods, the difference is stark. Some landlords invest in shared drainage brick channels, covered grates, a pit emptied twice a year. Others do nothing. One property you pass has a system so broken that residents have built a wooden plank bridge to avoid stepping directly into the mess. You ask a passerby if they've complained. They laugh. Who do we tell the river historians still debate whether the Great Stink prompted serious awareness of class-based sanitation, or whether it just made rich people more determined to build their houses further from the river? Some believe the crisis finally pushed lawmakers to acknowledge that public health couldn't be left to individual wealth. Others point out that reform came only after the stench breached Parliament itself. You watch a doctor climb out of a carriage, shaking a bottle of tonic with the showmanship of a stage magician. He administers it to a sick child who's been lying listless on the stoop. The mother thanks him with exhausted politeness. He tips his hat, pockets the coin, and rides off to his next appointment in Chelsea. Behind you, someone vomits quietly into a drain. Even the remedies feel uneven. Clean water was available if you lived near a private pump. Flush toilets were popular if you could afford the plumbing. Scented soap was sold in elegant boxes if you could read the label. And yet, despite it all, people survive. Not because conditions are kind, but because community is stubborn. You see neighbors helping neighbors, One woman shares her vinegar cloth with another. A man offers boiled herbs to a coughing child. A group of children are playing marbles in a clear patch of street, pretending the rules still matter. And they do. Because even in the worst of it, even when the city stinks and the river threatens and the newspapers scream, people cling to order, however small, even if it's just a bar of soap passed from one family to the next, or a broom sweeping the filth away before anyone else wakes. You leave the alley just as the sun breaks through the haze. It doesn't make the smell go away, but it makes the bricks glow orange, and for a moment, the whole block looks almost golden. You close your eyes. The stink is still there. But so are they. Still standing. Still sweeping. Still waiting for someone. Anyone. To make it better. You're standing inside what might optimistically be called a chemist's shop, though it smells more like a closet that's been overwhelmed by its own ambition. Shelves are stacked with bottles in various shades of brown, green, and blue. Some are corked. Some are leaking. All promise miracles specifically. Miracles involving smell. Welcome to the strange and fragrant world of Victorian deodorizers. The Great Stink. You see, it didn't just ruin appetites and overwhelm nostrils, it sparked a consumer boom. If the air was your enemy, then every bottle, powder, sponge, and spritz was your potential salvation. You pick up a jar labeled Dr. Greaves Municipal Air Neutralizer. The label shows a cheerful man holding a bouquet while walking through a swamp. It smells like pine needles and regret. The shopkeeper assures you it's a bestseller. Next to it, lavender chloride, Miasma mufflers, Florentia's Sweet Wind Essence. Most contain some combination of vinegar, alcohol, turpentine, or carbolic acid. A few contain crushed rose petals. One advertises itself as suitable for royalty in riverbanks. And people bought them. By the armload. Perfume shops that once catered to the refined noses of the elite suddenly found themselves selling industrial-grade scent solutions to anyone with a pulse and a shilling. Housewives soaked curtains. Office clerks dabbed cologne behind their ears like they were trying to distract death itself. Street vendors hawked little sachets of herbs, rose petals, and what might have been shredded boot leather. Historians still argue whether any of these concoctions made a measurable difference. Most agree they were, at best, placebo perfumes. But in a city where the air felt like it had weight, the illusion of control was worth everything. You walk through Covent Garden next, and the assault on your senses continues. A flower stall is doing brisk business, not just with bouquets, but with nosegays, small clusters of fragrant blooms that people carried around to press against their faces. You see one woman pause mid-conversation, raise her nosegay, and inhale with the solemnity of someone receiving spiritual guidance. Across the street, a soap seller is shouting about lemon-scented liberation. His display features bars shaped like sunflowers and slogans like, "Fight the filth with freshness." People nod approvingly. Someone buys too. Meanwhile, the river gurgles behind the buildings. The most determined citizens turn to do-it-yourself aromatherapy. Newspapers printed recipes for air fresheners. A typical one might include vinegar, crushed mint, cloves, and lavender, all boiled together and placed in bowls around the home. Some added baking soda, others added faith. You pass a boarding house where the landlady proudly shows you her secret oranges studded with cloves, hanging from every window. They look like strange, fragrant hedgehogs. Keeps the evil air out, she says. And the rats don't like it either. Does it work? No. But she believes it does. And belief matters. Because in a city this overwhelmed, smell wasn't just physical, it was psychological. People described the air as oppressive, suffocating, contagious. They had dreams about drowning in sewage. They woke up gagging. They swore they could taste the Thames. So they fought back however they could. You duck into a pub to escape the heat. And even here, the war against smell is underway. The landlord is burning rosemary in a little dish behind the bar. The tables are wiped with something that smells like cheap gin and elderflower. A chalkboard sign reads, "Lime spritz free with every pint." It doesn't help. But again, it's about the gesture. About doing something. Even when the something is soaking your shoes in vinegar and muttering curses in Latin. One particularly odd invention making the rounds is the odor veil, a mesh of scented cloth, worn like a veil across the lower face. It was especially popular among the fashionable upper class, who preferred to pretend they were wearing it for elegance and not to avoid vomiting on their walking sticks. Another device. The aromatic waistcoat padded with sachets of herbs and perfume-soaked fabric. You smell one up close. It's like hugging a bouquet that's been left in a chimney. And yet, somehow, it's comforting. You step back outside, into the sun, and the full force of the stink returns. It's in your mouth now, your clothes, your mood. And still, you see people dabbing their wrists with bergamot, tossing camphor into the drains, buying another bottle of Riverbane from the hopeful chemist with the crooked spectacles. Because even when the system failed, even when Parliament delayed, even when doctors debated theories that were already falling apart, Londoners still fought the stink, not with pipes or policy, but with lemons. You're walking through a cloud of something floral, something sharp, and something unmistakably burning. A man just tossed a handful of sage, mint, and mystery herbs into a pan over hot coals in the middle of the street. He calls it a street purification ritual. You call it smoke with ambition. Welcome to the part of the great stink where the city stopped pretending perfume was enough and started getting experimental. Because when lemons failed and lavender sagged, Londoners turned to the big guns gas masks, veils, and full-on chemical warfare. You spot a woman strolling past in a veil so thick it's less fashion accessory and more mosquito net. Beneath it, she holds a pomander, a hollow orb filled with dried roses, cloves, vinegar-soaked sponges, and maybe a personal prayer or two. She walks like someone who expects divine intervention before dinner. Across the street, a gentleman adjusts a small tube strapped to his collar, an early respirator, lined with charcoal and soaked in vinegar. It's called a miasma filter. It mostly filters out friends. And this isn't just fringe behavior. These gadgets and garments are everywhere. Pharmacists sell nasal guards, tiny sponge plugs soaked in mint and stuffed into the nostrils. Picture a scented sneeze waiting to happen. Ladies wear lace-lined collars doused in camphor. Clerks tie ribbons of rosewater-soaked cloth inside their top hats and adjust them like they're performing surgery on a bouquet. And still, none of it helps for long, because the smell isn't fading. It's winning. Every alley seems worse than the last. You pass a butcher shop with a candle burning on the sill, an old trick to mask the scent of rotting meat. Someone's burning coffee beans in a tin pail nearby. Another person is waving eucalyptus branches like they're trying to conduct the air away. The worst part, people start to adapt. Their senses dull. You hear it in conversation. It's not that bad today. Better than last week. At least the breeze is blowing towards Southwark. As if someone else's misery is now a comforting metric. That's the dangerous magic of olfactory fatigue. You stop noticing what your brain can't handle. The smell lingers, but your awareness thins out like your nose decides. You know what? Let's just survive this emotionally. Even parliamentarians begin acting as if soaked curtains and carbolic air sprays are solutions. One member proposes inventing a kind of portable room, a small tent to carry on your back, with filtered air inside. Another suggests the radical idea of dropping perfume-soaked ropes across the river. No one knows why. Meanwhile, the actual solution cleaning the river is still mired in meetings, committee squabbles, and financial wrangling. So instead, you get more scented oil, more vinegar steam, and more desperate measures. There's even a story half true. Half hysteria of a woman who filled her entire sitting room with lavender branches and lit candles on every windowsill, creating a hot box of herbal smoke so thick she passed out. She woke up 2 hours later and swore she'd defeated the miasma. She hadn't, but she felt better. And sometimes, that's enough. Historians still debate how effective any of this really was. Some say the obsession with scent masking delayed genuine reform. Others believe it was a vital psychological crutch, an entire city clinging to rose water and menthol, while waiting for engineers to save them from themselves. You sit on a stoop and watch a man in a fine waistcoat dab his pulse point with what smells like pure gin. Not drinking it, wearing it. Across the way, a group of schoolboys hold a contest to see who can breathe through a handful of marigolds the longest without coughing. The winner gets a sour plum, and you just sit and breathe shallowly, because everyone is waiting. Waiting for the air to shift, waiting for someone to take action, waiting for more than scented rags and polite denial. The sun sets. The river reflects the pink sky like a lazy beast pretending to sleep. But the stink always rises. And somewhere nearby, another shopkeeper lights another candle and calls it hope. It begins not with a law, but with a laugh. You're standing outside a print shop, and the window display is full of cartoons. Men with clothespins on their noses. Women fainting into rivers of filth. A giant, bearded figure labeled the Thames looming over Parliament with stink lines drawn like battle banners. London is not just disgusted, it's entertained. Because when the smell gets too awful to bear, the people make jokes. The great stink becomes front-page news. Yes, but also a punchline. Satirists go to work with gleeful speed. Newspapers publish mock editorials from the river itself, apologizing for the inconvenience and blaming the citizens for using it as a toilet. You buy a copy of Punch magazine from a street boy, and inside there's a sketch of Parliament members trying to hold a session while balancing on barrels, each with a bouquet strapped to their faces. The caption, "A blooming good debate." It's terrible. It's perfect. The stink somehow becomes cultural currency. You pass a bookseller offering pamphlets with titles like Stench and Sensibility and To Smell or Not to Smell. A poet performs an ode to sewage on a crate outside the Royal Exchange, rhyming discharge with large to mixed applause. And it's not just writers. Soap makers leap at the opportunity. One brand advertises itself as the only bar to banish the Thames. Another claims its rose-scented formula is preferred by Queen Victoria's nose. Allegedly, someone invents a cologne named Eau de Reform, which smells suspiciously like burnt cinnamon and desperation. Theatrical productions join in. One fringe theater stages a melodrama called The Curse of the River God, where the villain is literally a man made of mud and fog. In the final scene, he is defeated by a burst pipe and a young engineer with very clean hands. Historians still argue how much this wave of humor influenced public opinion. Some believe it dulled the urgency, made the crisis easier to ignore. Others argue the opposite, that satire sharpened awareness, giving people language to name the horror they were living through. You suspect both are true, because satire does what perfume cannot. It makes you look. It holds up a mirror, however cracked, and says, "This is real. This is ridiculous. This must change." And slowly that change begins to stir, because in between the jokes and the stink, public pressure builds. Letters flood Parliament dozens a day. Citizens demand reform. Pamphlets call for purification of the people's river. One public speaker, after dabbing his face with lemon oil, declares that the nation will not hold its nose forever. And Parliament still stalling, still sniffing behind curtains, still trying to balance politics with pride, until something shifts, until the satire gets personal. One cartoonist draws a portrait of the Prime Minister with a chamber pot for a crown. Another depicts Parliament itself as a clogged drain, filled with sleeping rats and rhetorical sludge. And suddenly, the laughs are less forgiving. The joke has teeth now. You walk past a group of students debating solutions. One suggests piping the Thames directly into France. Another proposes filling the river with mint. A third, dressed like a young philosopher who's never actually bathed, recites Jon Snow's water theory like scripture. It's messy, loud, hopeful. Because the stink has unified the city in a strange, sour way. From street vendors to scholars, from poor dock workers to wealthy merchants, everyone has a stake in this. Everyone breathes the same air, even the ones pretending they don't. And that's when the real headlines start to shift. Not jokes, but plans, proposals, pipes. A name begins to appear, quietly at first. A man who has no interest in satire, no flair for metaphor, just numbers and blueprints, and a really, really long list of bricks. You pass another cartoon. This one shows the Thames in a straitjacket, being wheeled away by engineers. The caption, "Time for treatment." And for once, the joke is right, because London's about to meet the man who will end the stink. You're standing beside a man in a neat gray suit, hair parted with the kind of precision that suggests he also organizes his socks alphabetically. His name is Joseph Bazalgette, and he does not smile much. But that's okay, because he is not here to entertain you. He is here to save London. You've probably never been more relieved to meet a civil engineer. Bazalgette doesn't make speeches. He doesn't write poems. He doesn't peddle lavender sachets or dab vinegar behind his ears. He just walks the embankment with a measuring stick, a notebook, and the expression of someone who once tried to design a sewage system in his dreams and woke up disappointed it didn't work. He surveys the Thames like a man studying a wound, which, to him, it is. Because while the city debates and perfumes and gags into perfumed handkerchiefs, Bazalgette has been drawing, mapping, calculating, running numbers so large they feel like myth. You follow him into a cramped office filled with rolled blueprints, coffee-stained notes, and what looks suspiciously like a jar of river sludge. He doesn't notice you. He's muttering about gradients and pipe diameters, scrawling in the margins, flipping between sheets like a man possessed. And here's the thing he is possessed. By order, by logic, by the firm belief that pipes can solve what Parliament, poetry, and perfume could not. He has a plan. Not a small one. Not a temporary one. Not let's dredge the river and hope. No. Bazalgette's plan is epic. He proposes building 83 miles of underground brick sewers, giant tunnels large enough to walk through. Sloped perfectly so waste flows away from the city instead of through it. He wants to intercept the waste before it ever touches the Thames, rerouting it far downstream where it can be discharged into the tidal estuary and swept out to sea. It's ambitious. It's expensive. It's utterly necessary. You watch as he explains the elevations, the flow rates, the pumping stations, the venting towers. He sketches in midair with his pencil. He doesn't simplify anything. He assumes the people around him will catch up or get out of the way. And slowly, they do. Because Bazalgette isn't just brilliant. He's practical. He knows politicians won't approve a sewer just because it's hygienic, but they might approve it if it protects property values, if it saves Parliament from choking, if it creates jobs and restores commerce, and most importantly, gets the smell out of their curtains. So he pitches it that way. And it works. Historians still debate exactly when the tide turned. Some say it was the second week of July when the House of Commons had to adjourn due to the intolerable effluvia. Others point to a newspaper editorial calling for Bazalgette to be given full command of the bricks. But by the end of summer, something unthinkable has happened. The government agrees. You walk with Bazalgette along the river as surveyors hammer stakes into the ground. There's a crew laying out chalk lines, arguing about gradients. Children throw pebbles into the water and wrinkle their noses. A barge passes by, slower than it should be, cutting through sludge like molasses. And Joseph just nods, because this is what he's waited for. He begins assembling his team. Bricklayers, diggers, mathematicians, architects, laborers by the thousands. They'll work in shifts. They'll dig by hand. They'll lay bricks in perfect curves, using Portland cement and sweat and a kind of quiet urgency that only comes from saving a city with math. The scope is mind-boggling. The engineering revolutionary. He designs everything to last centuries, not decades. He builds the tunnels twice as large as needed. Anticipating the city's growth a decision later, historians will call miraculously forward-thinking. Though Bazalgette would probably say it was just common sense. He factors in rainwater, soil type, even how people walk on bridges. So his underground chambers won't collapse under the weight of traffic. You stare at the first tunnel entrance being dug. It doesn't look like salvation. It looks like a hole. But that's the magic of it. Because while everyone else has been dealing in metaphors and air fresheners, Bazalgette has been dealing in mud and brick, in trench depths and manhole spacing, and the exact angle at which waste stops flowing and starts stagnating. He doesn't want applause. He wants flow efficiency. And so, London begins to change not with fireworks, but with footing levels. And under the smell, under the jokes, under the exhausted prayers of a weary city, something begins to move. Downward. Away. Into the dark. Where Joseph Bazalgette has already made room. You're squinting down into what looks like the mouth of a very large brick dragon. It smells like damp stone, copper, and the distant echo of every bad decision ever flushed. But to Joseph Bazalgette, this isn't a dragon, it's a solution. The construction has begun. All across London, work crews are digging trenches, huge ones, sometimes 30 feet deep. Sometimes even more. You walk alongside one of these yawning gaps in the earth and peer down to see a line of workers moving like ants. Except ants don't wear bowler hats or sing very rude songs about Parliament's nose hairs. Each worker has a job. Some dig, some carry, some lower buckets of bricks by pulley. Some just shout directions over the roar of carts, hammers, and impatient horses. The city isn't quiet anymore. It rumbles with effort. This is what it takes to build a sewer under a living city. They can't just close London and start over. So they tunnel beneath homes, roads, gardens, and markets carefully, methodically, like surgeons operating while the patient is still walking around, trying to buy turnips. And the star of the show, brick. Millions of them. Laid by hand, arched into perfect curves to keep the tunnels strong and self-cleaning. Bazalgette insists on quality, no-cutting corners. Each section is built to exacting standards. If the slope is wrong by even a degree, the flow backs up. If the curve isn't smooth, sediment collects. You crouch down beside a tunnel under construction and run your hand over the damp mortar. The curve is so precise it could double as a giant cereal bowl. It gleams faintly in the lantern light. A worker nearby coughs, wipes his brow, and says, "Only another 600 miles to go." He's only half joking. In total, Bazalgette's plan includes 100 miles of street-level sewers, 83 miles of main intercepting sewers, 4 massive pumping stations, dozens of new outfalls to redirect waste far downstream. You pass one of the pumping station sites, a field of scaffolding, gears, and thick iron valves. These machines will lift the sewage uphill when gravity alone won't do the job. One of them, Crossness, will later be called a cathedral of waste because even filth deserves high ceilings and good tile work. Apparently, it's a marvel of logistics, all while the city keeps moving. Horse-drawn buses rattle overhead, fishmongers haggle beside open trenches. At one site, a team is laying pipe below a bakery that has no idea it's perched on the future of urban sanitation. Workers face every hazard you can imagine. Floods, collapsing walls, toxic gases that smell like bad eggs and feel like nightmares. There are even rats, not the everyday kind, but the river kind, large, arrogant, and entirely too clever. And yet, no one stops. Because this isn't just a job, it's a mission. You watch as a foreman measures a curve with a handmade gauge, then nods once, satisfied. Another worker seals a brick into place, taps it twice, and moves on. The tunnel continues to grow. section by section, with the same quiet certainty as a root under a tree. Above ground, the city is beginning to notice. Not just the smell, though, that's slowly changing, but the rhythm of work. New streets are paved. Old roads are repaired. People start to whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, the worst might pass. And Bazalgette. He keeps walking. He visits every site, checks every blueprint. When cholera returns during the construction period, he redoubles the schedule. When costs rise, he fights to protect the quality. He knows this isn't just about stink, it's about trust. Historians often call him a bureaucrat. But he was also an artist of infrastructure. And this was his masterpiece. You stand on a newly finished section of sewer late one evening, as the lanterns flicker and the workers pack up for the night. The air down here is still not clean. Exactly, but ready. The bricks shine with moisture. A thin trickle of water winds its way down the center channel like the first line of a new chapter. And above you, London sleeps. Still unaware that beneath its feet, a quiet revolution is happening. One that doesn't smell of roses, but doesn't smell at all. You're standing in a candlelit hallway that smells faintly of beeswax and something citrusy, but more importantly, it does not smell like the Thames. That's because you're in Buckingham Palace. And the pipes here are now connected to Joseph Bazalgette's growing web of underground salvation. Yes, even royalty is on board. Which helps because if you want the country to take sanitation seriously, it doesn't hurt to have a queen who prefers her throne to flush properly. The tide is turning, both metaphorically and very slowly in the river. It's 1860 and Bazalgette's plans are no longer just ink and intention. They're reality. Pipe by pipe. Pumping station by pumping station. London's waste is being intercepted, redirected, and politely escorted far away from polite society. And now the public is starting to notice. You overhear two women at a market near Victoria Embankment. One sniffs the air cautiously, then says, "Well, it's not nice, but it's not." Murder? Progress. Even newspapers who once preferred satire over optimism begin printing cautious praise. Articles describe the heroic trench work happening below the city. They print diagrams. One cartoon even shows Bazalgette standing astride a sewer pipe like a Roman god, wielding a wrench like a scepter. He hates it. He prefers ledgers to limelight, but he accepts the attention if it means continued support. And support is critical, because this isn't just about digging holes and laying bricks. It's about changing how a city thinks about itself. That takes time, and leadership, and the occasional royal endorsement. So when Prince Albert, the Queen's husband, becomes a vocal supporter of sewer reform, it matters. His interest isn't just symbolic. He tours the works. He speaks with engineers. He even brings guests to see the progress firsthand. Nothing says dinner party like, "Would you like to visit the world's most hygienic tunnel tomorrow?" And when tragedy strikes, when Albert dies of typhoid in 1861, the connection between sanitation and health becomes heartbreakingly personal for the monarchy. The Queen enters mourning, and the city grieves with her. Public health becomes more than just engineering. It becomes a moral duty. You find yourself at a gathering of public health officials, where a minister delivers a speech titled, "Clean Water for a Civilized People." It's the kind of phrase that would have been laughed out of Parliament 10 years ago. Now it gets polite applause. And beneath the streets, the system keeps growing. You walk along one of the new embankments, broad, elegant promenades built not just for traffic, but to hide enormous sewer pipes underneath. Bazalgette's genius wasn't only in engineering, it was in making the solution beautiful. He understood that if people could see what they were paying for, they'd value it more. So he put sewers under gardens, walkways, lampposts, even statues. And above all, he designed them for the future. Historians still marvel at this. At a time when most cities built for just enough, Bazalgette built double. His pipes were meant to handle a population far beyond London's current numbers, and somehow, miraculously, they still function today. You meet a man overseeing one of the final connections near Chelsea. He leans on a shovel and says, "Feels like we're draining sin from the city, don't it?" You nod, mostly because you've just stepped in something you hope was mud. It's not glamorous. It's not always visible. But by 1865, more than half of the main intercepting sewer is complete. Cholera cases have dropped. The air, while not fragrant, no longer punches you in the throat. Children play beside the river again, though locals still tell them not to drink it. Just in case. You glance at the Thames. It's no longer black. More deep brownish gray. Not exactly inviting, but no longer terrifying. Birds return. Barges move freely. Fishermen start to see life in the water again. And though no ceremony is held, no bells rung, no official tada, the mood in the city shifts. London is breathing again. All because a man with a mustache and a slide rule convinced the government that bricks could save lives. You pass a boy dipping a toe in the river and hear him ask, "Will it ever be blue?" His mother shrugs. Maybe. But now it doesn't bite. And that's enough for now. You're crouched beside a water pump, watching an older gentleman in a stiff collar pour a glass of what looks like crystal clear water. He raises it toward the light, swirls it, sniffs, then, with the confidence of a man who believes more in science than luck, he drinks it. You wince. Because not long ago, drinking from a public pump in London was roughly equivalent to daring a stranger to slap you with cholera. But something has changed. And it's not just the plumbing, it's the science. Because around the same time Joseph Bazalgette was sketching sewer maps by candlelight, another quiet revolution was underway, one that challenged the entire foundation of public health. It starts with a man named John Snow. Yes, the same man who traced the 1854 cholera outbreak to the Broad Street pump and became an early advocate for germ theory, even though most of his peers were still blaming bad air and wicked smells. In 1858, Snow is no longer alive. He died at just 45 before seeing his ideas take hold, but his ghost lingers at the edge of every clean water tap and every line of Bazalgette's intercepting sewer. Because Snow was right. The stink didn't cause the disease. The water did. And slowly, painfully slowly, the medical establishment begins to admit it. You walk into a hospital ward near Soho, where a group of physicians are gathered around a chalkboard. One of them is drawing microbes' tiny squiggles with evil little mustaches, while another furrows his brow and mutters, "Invisible creatures, really." But the tide is turning. You spot a leaflet pinned beside the door titled, "Water Purity and the Triumph Over Cholera." It cites recent studies, laboratory work, the success of filtering systems, It references Bazalgette's sewers as evidence that disease rates drop when water is clean, even if the river still occasionally smells like a goat's revenge. Historians still debate how quickly germ theory overtook miasma theory in Britain. Some say it was embraced within a generation. Others argue that well into the 1870s, many doctors continued to treat smell as the ultimate culprit. But by the mid-1860s, things are shifting. You pass a bookshop where a new volume is displayed in the window. On the mode of communication of cholera Snow's old work, now gaining traction. A university student stands outside reading the introduction aloud to his confused dog. In the streets, filters become fashionable. Not air filters, water filters. Glass jars with charcoal chambers, small copper taps, elaborate instruction manuals. Households display them like teapots. One company advertises theirs as fit for a lady's drawing room and the Lord's bowels alike. It's all very elegant and, finally, effective. Meanwhile, new laws are passed. Water companies are told to stop drawing from the Thames near central London. Reservoirs are moved upstream. Filtration stations are installed. Pipes are cleaned. Inspectors begin carrying clipboards instead of just good intentions. You follow one of them into a tenement, where he inspects a pipe with the solemn air of someone examining a very tiny cannon. He nods once, makes a note, and leaves behind a certificate of sanitary acceptability. It's the Victorian equivalent of a gold star, and all the while the old beliefs don't go quietly. You overhear a debate outside a church, one man insisting that God punishes sinners with foul air. Another pointing to a graph that he clearly doesn't understand but likes the shape of. Still, the numbers don't lie. As Bazalgette's sewers expand and cleaner water reaches more neighborhoods, cholera retreats. Slowly, unevenly, but definitively. A mother in Lambeth fills a pot from her new tap and murmurs, "Tastes less like pennies today." Her son, delighted, uses the extra water to rinse a very sticky dog. You walk past the Thames at dusk, and for the first time, you notice something missing. Not the smell, it still lingers like a shy ghost, but the fear. People walk along the riverbank again. Vendors return. Someone plays a fiddle. Children throw stones into the water without their parents screaming. It's not perfect. It's not paradise. But it's progress. And snow. He never saw this. He died too soon. But his ideas once dismissed, laughed at, even scorned are now embedded in the very bricks beneath your feet. His ghost smiles beneath every turning valve, every rinsed glass, every child who drinks water and lives. You're crouched beside a grate on a newly cobbled road, watching water swirl down into the darkness, and for once, you're not worried about where it's going, because you know, it's flowing into one of Bazalgette's sewers, curving gently beneath your feet, pulled along by nothing more than gravity and very good design. This, at last, is the part of the story where cesspits become obsolete, and the city begins to breathe a little easier. Not all at once, not everywhere, but bit by bit, street by street. The old world of stinking courtyards and overflowing privies gives way to a network of civility hidden beneath iron manhole covers and elegant lampposts. You stroll through a neighborhood once infamous for its rank gutters. Now the gutters are dry. The air smells of dust and horses. Yes, but no longer death. A baker waves to you from his open window. A child skips past, trailing a hoop and singing something vaguely threatening about geese. It feels normal. And that, more than anything, is victory. Because for decades, the normal had been filth. People stepping carefully to avoid puddles they hoped were just rain. Doors shut tight against miasma. Soap that barely made a dent. But now, the sewers hum quietly beneath it all, carrying away the past like a stream of forgotten fears. You follow a team of workers into a side alley, where they're decommissioning an old cesspit. It's exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. A square of cracked stone. A smell like ancient yogurt and betrayal. One man coughs violently while another mutters, "I've seen worse." Once, they shovel the contents hardened, dry, barely recognizable into a cart marked for sanitary disposal. And then, with surprising reverence, they brick it up. Permanently. A symbol, in its own gross way, of progress sealed in clay. And the shift isn't just underground, it's in the way people talk. You pass a cafe where two men are arguing over whose neighborhood now has the best drains. One boasts of a recent rainstorm where not a single puddle lingered past tea. The other swears his garden hasn't smelled like anything since Easter. Upstream, communities that once fought over well water now coordinate pump schedules. Engineers hold public lectures on waste management. A pamphlet titled, "Why Your House Should Connect to the Interceptor Sewer" becomes unexpectedly popular, especially among ambitious landlords and slightly tipsy clergymen. Historians still discuss this moment, the gradual transition from piecemeal, private waste solutions to a unified public sanitation system, as one of the most important shifts in urban history. Not flashy, not violent, just essential. And it changed how cities thought about themselves. Because for the first time, London wasn't just enduring itself. It was cleaning itself. The change reaches even the language. Words like effluvia and night soil begin to disappear from everyday use. Children born in the 1870s grow up without ever seeing a waste cart in their alley. The smell of raw sewage becomes a memory, not a fact of life. You pass an older woman who pauses at a corner, looking down at a new drain cover. "Used to be a pit there," she says. "You could smell it 2 streets over." She smiles. "Haven't thought of it in years." You smile too, because the quiet miracle of all this is that nothing dramatic happens anymore. No daily newspaper reports on triumphs. No statues are built to honor drainage angles. But every clean street, every dry doorstep, every sweet breeze off the river is a monument to Bazalgette and to all the anonymous workers who hauled bricks, turned valves, and shored up tunnels with their bare hands. And yes, the Thames still isn't perfect. It's moody, murky, occasionally sulky after a storm. But it no longer threatens. It no longer kills. It just flows. And you exhale. Deeply. For the first time in what feels like a century. Because London has finally learned to flush. You're back at the riverbank now, standing on the edge of the Thames as dusk turns the sky to copper. The water moves with a lazy swirl, tugged by the tide. But it doesn't snarl anymore. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't bubble like something cursed. It simply flows. And for the people of London, that silence is the most miraculous sound of all. The great stink is over. Not officially, no one cut a ribbon. No parade of grateful noses marched through the streets, but slowly, imperceptibly, the air changed. People stopped holding handkerchiefs to their faces. The carts carrying vinegar and perfume stopped rattling down the lanes. The butchers reopened their river-facing windows. And you walk through a city that has rediscovered its own lungs. There are new things to smell now. Freshly baked bread from a bakery in Hammersmith. Coal smoke from a pub in Southwark. Damp grass in the parks, where children roll down hills and parents no longer shout. Don't breathe. It's not a perfect city still loud. Still crowded, still full of horses doing what horses do, but it's cleaner. It's safer. And perhaps most importantly, it's no longer pretending that a splash of lavender water will protect it from collapse. You sit on a bench above the embankment, one of Bazalgette's grand walkways. Neatly paved, lined with wrought iron railings, and hiding just beneath your feet. Some of the greatest feats of civil engineering ever attempted. No one passing you seems to notice. They sip coffee. They walk their dogs. They argue softly about theater schedules. But the reason they can do those things in peace is because, under their boots, the filth is gone. It's funny. The people who saved London never wore capes. They wore gloves, carried trowels, knew the exact angle of a slope that would keep a city from drowning in its own waste. Joseph Bazalgette's name starts appearing more often now in speeches, in papers, in dedications. A school is named after him, an alleyway, eventually a bridge. But he never becomes famous in the way poets or generals do. He becomes something rarer, trusted. Historians still argue whether he was the greatest public servant of his age. Some say he merely did his job well. Others insist he was a visionary whose foresight saved millions. Most agree that if the definition of heroism includes preventing disasters before they happen, then Bazalgette wears the crown. You rise and follow a group of school children touring the embankment. Their teacher points to the balustrade and says, "Underneath that, right now, thousands of gallons of sewage are moving safely out of the city." The children react exactly how you'd expect, but the teacher smiles and says, "That's how we stay healthy. Because of someone who thought ahead." It's the thinking ahead that matters most. Bazalgette didn't just fix a crisis. He anticipated the next one. He knew the population would grow, knew that clean water would only work if waste had somewhere else to go, knew that no one would thank him until years, decades after the smell had faded. And he was okay with that. You pass a plaque mounted discreetly on a wall near Victoria Embankment Gardens. It's not grand, just a few words, weathered by time and pigeons. It reads, "Joseph Bazalgette, engineer. He gave us clean air and asked for nothing." And that's the thing. This entire story, the stink, the sewers, the scientists and skeptics, it ends not with celebration, but with quiet. No more midnight vomiting from invisible rivers of filth. No more parliament sessions interrupted by bleach-soaked curtains. No more floating pigs. Just a city. Walking. Breathing. Living. You pause to watch the river one last time. It's darker now. The gas lamps flicker on one by one, their reflections shimmering in the current. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a violin with more passion than accuracy. A couple strolls hand in hand, talking about something mundane and lovely. You smile, because this is the gift of sanitation. You don't notice it when it works, but when it doesn't, you never forget. You're beneath the city now. Lantern in hand, boots echoing on damp brick as you follow a tour guide who keeps pausing to point at tunnels like they're Gothic cathedrals. And in a way they are. This is the hidden London, the one Bazalgette built beneath your feet, the one that never sleeps. You're standing in one of the great intercepting sewers, yes. Inside it, though, thankfully long after its prime career of carrying the city's waste. Now it's dry, part of a limited access maintenance system, and occasionally used for field trips, filming locations, or very niche first dates. You run your hand along the curved wall. The brick is cool, solid. Each section hand-laid. Each line of mortar once spread by a man whose name no one remembers. But the shape remains elegant, functional, and somehow reverent. Because this wasn't just infrastructure, it was a statement. A city that takes care of its people beneath the surface does more than build drains. It builds dignity. You glance up at the arch overhead. Bazalgette's signature design elliptical tunnels, self-cleaning through shape and slope. Every inch calculated to keep waste moving, even when no one above thinks about it. Which is most of the time. That's the thing about sewers, they're built to be forgotten. You trail the guide through a low passage into a circular chamber, a junction point where 3 tunnels meet. It's quiet here. Oddly peaceful. The kind of quiet that reminds you just how much noise the surface makes carriages. Bells, boots, dogs, bickering. Down here, it's all stone and memory. The guide tells a story about a man who got lost in these tunnels during a repair operation in 1872. Spent 6 hours wandering by candlelight. When they found him, he reportedly said, "I didn't panic. I just listened for clean air." It became something of a motto for sewer workers. Follow the air. You make a mental note of that. Above ground, London has moved on. It's the late 1870s now. The Great Stink is history. But below, these tunnels continue their silent work day and night, rain or shine. They've become part of the city's metabolism, quietly processing, quietly protecting. You exit the tunnel and climb back into sunlight, blinking at the contrast. The city feels louder now, brighter, but cleaner. 2. You watch a group of street sweepers working in coordinated lines, pushing water and dust into drains designed to handle both. One tips his cap as you pass. "Drain's not even smelly today," he says, beaming. Progress measured in absence. You make your way to one of the pumping station's crossness, the most famous, built like a church. Tall ceilings, ornate ironwork painted in Victorian reds and greens. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was a music hall, because Bazalgette believed even the dirtiest jobs deserved beauty. The station still stands today part museum, part memorial. Its massive beam engines once lifted millions of gallons of sewage from low-lying areas and sent it toward the estuary. Loud, relentless, proud. You stare at the machinery, polished now, but once caked in the grease and grime of life-saving labor. A plaque nearby reads, "For the health of the city and the grace of its function." No one talks like that anymore, but they live it every day. Historians often miss this part of the story, the maintenance, the long-term commitment. Bazalgette didn't just build the system. He designed it to be cared for. Easy to access, hard to break, flexible enough to handle storms, growth, and unpredictable behavior from an ever-changing public. And that, in the end, may have been his greatest genius. Not just solving the problem, but designing away the next one. You return to the surface one last time as twilight settles over the rooftops. A breeze stirs off the river, and it smells not sweet, but clean. You smile because under your feet, the city is still flowing, still draining, still humming with the quiet, holy work of 1,000 bricks and the man who placed them just so. You're sitting in a schoolroom now, one with high ceilings, creaky floors, and a blackboard where someone has written urban sanitation past and present. It's decades after the Great Stink. But the lesson is still being taught. And at the front of the class, a teacher holding a clay model of a sewer pipe, complete with tiny figurines of workers in flat caps and waistcoats. She begins the story with a phrase that makes the students groan. But you can't help smiling. It all started with a terrible smell. Because by now, the Great Stink has become legend. Not a bedtime story. Exactly, but something passed down, told in hushed tones and raised eyebrows. The tale of the time when an entire city choked on its own sewage, and one man with a slide rule and a deadline changed everything? You glance at the classroom walls. There are posters about clean water, waste treatment, disease prevention. But tucked between them, you see something unexpected, a photo of Joseph Bazalgette, looking stern and mustachioed, flanked by bricks and a measuring rod. The caption, "The man who made it bearable to breathe." It's a little silly. It's also completely true. The teacher continues, explaining how modern sanitation systems are built on his principles, how cities around the world copied the London model, how, even today, his pipes still run beneath the feet of millions. One student raises their hand. Did he get rich? The teacher pauses, then smiles. Not really, but he got remembered. And that's enough. You leave the school and head into the city once more. It's changed, of course. There are cars now, trains, electricity buzzing in the air, but some things remain the same. You walk past the Victoria Embankment, still elegant, still hiding massive sewer mains beneath. Children race scooters along the path. Couples share chips on benches. No one's covering their nose, because Bazalgette's legacy is invisible. And that's exactly how he wanted it. You pause by a small monument easy to miss unless you're looking for it. It's just a stone circle embedded in the sidewalk, engraved with the initials JWB and the year 1865. Below, it reads, "To the man who took our waste and gave us back our city." You smile. Because even now, decades later, there's a kind of reverence in that simplicity. Historians still argue about when, exactly, London became modern. Some say it was the expansion of the railways. Others point to the Industrial Revolution, or the rise of public schooling, or the invention of the telephone. But you know it started the day the city learned to clean itself. The day the people demanded not just progress, but health. And the day one engineer quietly answered, "I have a plan." You make your way toward a museum next, where an entire exhibit is dedicated to the infrastructure of survival. Old bricks, sewer maps, handwritten letters from the workers who laid the lines. There's even a preserved section of pipe, mounted in glass like a fossil. It's massive, and beautiful, and oddly moving. Visitors walk slowly through the room, some holding their breath out of instinct, only to laugh when they realize it doesn't smell like anything. That, too, is part of the story. you linger beside a quote etched into the wall. It's taken from Bazalgette's original notes on gradient measurements and brick curvature, but the curators have highlighted one sentence. It must last, for they will not thank us again. You think about that. About the quiet workers, the planners, the nameless laborers who dug through filth by candlelight so that generations they'd never meet could live without fear of their own river. It's easy to forget, but someone remembered. And now, so do you. You step back outside. The air is cool. A soft breeze drifts up from the Thames. It smells faintly of algae and city stone. Not sweet, not perfumed. Just alive. Just clean. And that's enough. You're strolling along the south bank now, just past sunset, where the lamps glow gold and the Thames reflects the city like a quiet secret. You pause near a railing and listen not to the traffic or the chatter, but to the faintest, deepest hum. The sound of a city exhaling through brick and pipe and gravity. Beneath your feet, Bazalgette's great arteries still carry the lifeblood of London. Not the glamorous part, not the visible part, but the part that matters every hour of every day. And now other cities have followed. You pass a row of tourists listening to a guide explain how London's 19th century sewer system inspired New York, Paris, Berlin, how countries sent engineers across oceans just to peek at Bazalgette's blueprints, to walk the embankments, to marvel at how infrastructure could be a form of love, because it was, and is. You pause outside a modern building labeled Thames Water. Inside, walls are covered in touchscreens and flowcharts, but at the center, behind glass, rests a single brick, one of Bazalgette's, stamped, fired, still whole. There's a small plaque that reads, "Respect the unseen." You sit on a nearby bench and think about that. Because in a world where monuments are usually tall, shiny, and self-congratulatory, this one runs under the city, unnoticed, uncelebrated, unfailingly dependable. That's what makes it beautiful. You walk west now, toward the Albert Embankment, where the smell of food from a riverside market floats up fried fish, spiced nuts, something sweet with cinnamon. The air is clean, the water still a little stubborn, but the fear is gone, and with it, a century's worth of sighs. People once lived in terror of their river. They braced themselves for every heat wave, every rainstorm, every strange cough in the night. They whispered about cholera like it had a face. They perfumed their babies and blamed the wind. And now they eat dinner beside it. You pass a family picnicking on the steps. A child dips their hands in the water. The mother doesn't stop them. She just smiles and hands over a towel. That, more than anything, tells you how far things have come. You find yourself at Westminster, where the old battle once raged behind lime-soaked curtains. Now the buildings are lit from within, windows open, no vinegar cloths in sight. Parliament debates other things. The river doesn't interrupt anymore. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not the stink. The story. Told in quiet footfalls across clean stone. In the cheerful drizzle of gutters after a rain. In the laughter of people walking home beside a river that no longer threatens to bite. Historians still wonder what might have happened if Bazalgette hadn't acted. If Parliament had kept ignoring. If the river had kept rising slower, darker, more deadly with each tide. They debate what he meant to the city. how many lives he saved, whether his legacy should be louder. But here, now, watching the lights shimmer on the water, you know the truth. He did what cities rarely thank anyone for. He made everything work. You stop one last time before heading home, and you look down into the river wide, quiet, complicated. It looks back, not with menace, but with memory, and you nod, because you remember too. You wake before sunrise, not because of any smell or noise or dread, but simply because the city is quiet, and something in the air invites you to witness that rarest of London gifts, a peaceful morning. You wrap a shawl over your shoulders and walk through the still sleeping streets. The stones are damp with dew. The trees whisper as the breeze finds them, and the only sound from the Thames is its patient lapping like a story being softly retold for the 1,000th time. You pass a lamplit bakery, the scent of warm bread curling around the doorframe like a blessing. The baker nods to you. You nod back, and in that small exchange, there's something sacred, something earned. Because not so long ago, people didn't dare leave their homes at dawn, not without a vinegar sponge, or a quick prayer, or a whispered wish to the wind. Now they walk, they breathe, they live. The river comes into view, wide and dark, its shoulders draped in fog. But it doesn't loom. It simply exists, present, powerful, but no longer poisonous. You find yourself back at the Victoria Embankment, Bazalgette's quiet masterpiece. A jogger passes. A street cleaner waves. You hear the rumble of a delivery cart in the distance. And beneath you, the great intercepting sewers carry on, flowing, draining, saving the city one silent second at a time. There is no statue of Bazalgette here, no anthem, no shrine, just the gentle reminder in every breath you take. You're not choking. You're not holding your nose. You're okay. A child on a morning walk with their father stops beside the railing. Wasn't this river gross before they ask? The father smiles. Terribly. He says, "But we fixed it." The child doesn't look impressed. They're already bored. And that, truly, is the legacy. Because the greatest victory isn't in what people remember. It's in what they never have to think about again. You sit for a while longer. The sun rises behind the buildings, bathing the river in gold. A boat hums past. A cyclist glides by. Someone tosses a coin into the water and makes a wish. And as the city stirs awake, as toast is buttered and coffee poured and streets begin to fill, the Thames simply flows. Quiet, steady, clean. And beneath it all, Bazalgette's bricks still hold. The stink is gone, but the story stays. So now, as the fog lifts and the city hums to life, you take one last slow breath in. Not sharp, not sour, just clean. And behind that simplicity lies a story of chaos, of crisis, of thousands of hands laying millions of bricks, each one saying, in its own small way, this city matters. Joseph Bazalgette didn't need glory. He needed gradient. He needed pipe diameter. He needed time. And in giving him those things, London gave itself a future. Tonight, let that be your comfort, that even in the messiest, most unglamorous moments when the world is overflowing, when the air feels heavy, when no one else seems to notice someone, somewhere is drawing the map, making the plan, building the tunnel, and one day, because of them, you will wake up and realize it's better, not suddenly, not perfectly, but better. So rest now. You've walked the river, you've breathed the air, you've seen what it means to fix what no one wanted to admit was broken. And in the quiet beneath your own life, may there always be someone brick in hand, eyes on the future laying the next line. Sleep well, friend. Tomorrow smells sweeter already.